So today we're going to talk about a story that is just as chilling as it is, believe it or not, inspiring. It's about a killer who thought he was clever, using bleach to literally wipe away his crimes and manipulation to hide right out in the open. He almost got away with murder. But what he didn't count on were two things: a father who would do absolutely anything to find his daughter, and a survivor whose will to live would finally unmask the monster. All right, let's get into this. Okay, so this guy right here is Travis Forbes. He's on live TV looking a reporter right in the eye and flat out denying he had anything to do with the disappearance of 19-year-old Kenya Mange. But you gotta watch closely. As he says the words, "I did not," his head gives this tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It's one of those classic tells, a subconscious slip of guilt that just leaks out while he's busy building this public lie. And it's that chilling gap between his words and his body that really defined his whole game. The police and the media, they eventually gave him a nickname that just perfectly captured his MO, the Bleach Monster. And why? Well, because every single time investigators thought they had a lead, they'd hit a crime scene that was scrubbed so clean, so completely soaked in bleach, that any hope of finding evidence was just gone. For months, he was like a ghost, this prime suspect they just couldn't pin anything on, playing this incredibly frustrating game of cat and mouse. And this is where it all starts, with Kenya Mange. She's a bright 19-year-old out with her friends in Denver, having a good time. She goes to the restroom at a club, and she just never comes back. Her friends find her purse and her phone left right there on the table, which, as you know, is a huge red flag. The last anyone saw of her, she seemed really disoriented, which was completely out of character for her. And just like that, she had vanished into thin air. So, this became the big, agonizing question for everyone, for Kenya's family and for the Denver police. I mean, they had a person of interest, Travis Forbes, a guy who actually admitted to giving her a ride in his, get this, creepy white van. They had suspicion. They had this bizarre story that made no sense, but they had no body and zero physical evidence. So how on earth was he doing it? See, Forbes wasn't just some sloppy criminal. No, he was methodical. His weapon of choice wasn't a gun or a knife. It was a bottle of bleach, and he used it to just obliterate any trace of his victims. He also knew how to play the system. He exploited that critical 72-hour waiting period for filing a missing persons report, basically giving himself a 3-day head start. So while the cops' hands were tied, he was busy spinning this web of lies, and then, in an act of just pure audacity, went on television to tell the world he was innocent. With the official investigation pretty much stalled before it could even get started, the whole story shifts to one man who absolutely refused to wait: Kenya's father, Tony Lee. The second he heard his daughter was missing, he didn't just panic. Nope. He went into what he called high alert and immediately launched his own investigation. Just try to imagine this nightmare. On day one, the police tell him, "Sorry, our hands are tied for 72 hours. So Tony gets on his daughter's phone, finds a weird text from Travis, and just starts dialing. On day two, Travis actually calls back with this completely unbelievable story. By day three, Tony has just had it. He calls Travis, sets him a meeting, and puts a 9mm pistol in his waistband, even as his wife is begging him not to go. He was going to get answers, one way or another. You really have to put yourself in his shoes for a second. His wife is so terrified of what he might do that she actually calls the police, begging them to stop him. But Tony wasn't looking for a fight. He was just a father, pushed to the absolute limit, willing to walk right into danger because he felt like the system was failing his little girl. He just had to go. And this is where it gets really chilling. The police did show up, and they just kind of stood by while Tony talked to Travis. Travis tells his story again, and then he sticks out his hand for a handshake. Tony later said it felt like an earthquake was starting under Travis's feet, a tremor that traveled right up his arm. In that 1 second, every suspicion he had just clicked into place. He knew. He was shaking the hand of his daughter's killer. And after that, the case went cold. For months. The police had their suspect. They had a suspicious cooler that was taped shut, a burned-out barrel, but they had nothing solid. The trail was completely dead. And then, on July 5th, 2011, the monster made a huge mistake. He attacked again. And in doing so, he created the one thing in the world that could finally bring him down: a survivor. Yep, Travis Forbes struck again. This time, he followed a 30-year-old woman named Lydia Tillman home from a fireworks show. He attacked her, he assaulted her, and then, believing she was dead, He went through his whole sick routine. He doused her body with bleach and set her apartment on fire to destroy all the evidence. But he made one fatal mistake.
It's almost unbelievable. Lydia, after everything she'd been through, left for dead, woke up to her entire apartment engulfed in flames. And with this unimaginable strength and will to live, she somehow dragged her broken body to the window and jumped from the second story down onto solid concrete. It was this incredible act of pure survival that would not only save her life, but would finally bring Kenyon Monge's killer to justice.
The lead detective on Lydia's case, a woman named Jacqueline Shackley, she immediately noticed the signatures: the sudden attack, that overwhelming smell of bleach, the fire. She remembered an alert from Denver PD about a person of interest in the Monge case who was now living in her town. The second she called Detective Gurule in Denver and described the scene, he knew. He just said, "This is him." And this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? It shows you the breakthrough. Kenya's case was just this frustrating pile of suspicions. But Lydia's case, it provided the one thing they were missing. Even though she'd been drenched in bleach, the forensic team found the attacker's DNA. And where did they find it? Under Lydia's fingernails. She had fought back. And in fighting back, she had captured the very evidence that would seal his fate. Just one. That's all it took. One single DNA match. After this agonizing week of waiting for the lab results, while the police were holding Travis on some minor charge just to keep him off the streets, the call finally came in. The DNA from under Lydia's fingernails was a perfect match to Travis Forbes. The monster was finally, officially unmasked. Faced with evidence he couldn't deny, Travis knew the game was over. But, for Tony Lee, it wasn't about the death penalty anymore. He just wanted to bring his daughter home. So Detective Gurule offered him a deal. You confess to everything, you show us where Kenya is, and we'll take the death penalty off the table. Travis agreed. He led them out to a shallow grave, stood on a hill, and just said, "You're standing right on top of her." So, with the confession locked in and Kenya's body finally recovered, the legal chapter of this story was closing. But the human story, that was entering its most powerful phase. What happened next, in the courtroom and in the years that followed, is just a profound lesson in strength, in grace, and in what justice can really look like. At the sentencing hearing, just 2 days after getting out of the hospital and still unable to speak, Lydia Tillman had her father read her victim impact statement, and it ended with words that stunned the entire courtroom into silence. "Travis Forbes, I forgive you for what you did to me." The detective said there wasn't a dry eye in the place. It was this incredible act of taking her power back, of just refusing to live with that hatred. The detectives on the case were crystal clear about Lydia's impact. They said, "We are absolutely positive that she has saved lives out there. Her survival didn't just solve a murder, it stopped a serial killer in his tracks." And at the same time, Tony Lee funneled his own grief into action. He started a foundation in Kenya's name to help other families of missing people, making sure his daughter's legacy would be one of hope and help for others. And this is the final word from the woman whose incredible will brought this whole nightmare to an end. Lydia saw that her attacker was driven by fear and by hate. And in her survival, and maybe even more so in her recovery and her choice to forgive, she refused to let those emotions define her. She chose love. She chose peace. And as she says herself, "And I won." So that kind of leaves us with this question to think about, right? For Tony Lee, was winning finally bringing his daughter home? For Lydia Tillman, was it surviving the unsurvivable? Or was it that powerful act of forgiveness? This case really shows that winning against that kind of darkness isn't just about locking a monster away. It's about the light that just refuses to be put out in the aftermath.